I'm Jennifer Reynolds. I'm 31 years old, and my own parents took me to court to try and steal my house and give it to my younger brother. Sounds like the plot of a bad movie, I know, but it was my life. Before I tell you how a single forgotten folder of old college emails blew their entire case apart in front of a judge and exposed them for who they really are, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know you're out there, that I'm not just talking into the void. For me, peace has always had a specific smell. It's not the smell of the ocean or a forest. It's the smell of WD-40, hot metal, fresh cut wood, and old, reliable American steel. It's the smell of my garage. That two-car space wasn't just an add-on to the house. It was the entire reason I bought the house in the first place. The house itself was modest, a two-story colonial with a wraparound porch that needed a new coat of paint. It was nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen. But the garage was my sanctuary. It was the physical manifestation of 8 long years of brutal, relentless saving. I started my career as an automotive engineer, making $42,000 a year right out of state college. I lived in cheap apartments. I drove a 10-year-old beater. I never took vacations. Every spare dollar went into a savings account until I had the $45,000 down payment. It was all my own money. No cosigners, no gifts, no help. My name, Jennifer Reynolds, was the only one on the deed. It was my castle, and the garage was the throne room. Inside that sanctuary was my other piece of hard-earned peace, a 1978 Harley-Davidson shovelhead, sitting proudly on the hydraulic lift in the middle of the polished concrete floor. I'd been working on it for 8 months, a complete frame-up restoration. Every nut, every bolt, every wire was a decision I made. A problem I solved with my own 2 hands. It was my meditation. The one place where the noise of the world faded away, and all that mattered was the perfect fit of a piston in a cylinder. That particular Saturday morning was perfect. The early sun cut through the high windows, glinting off the mirror-finished chrome of the new exhaust pipes I'd just fitted the night before. I had a huge mug of black coffee steaming on my workbench, right next to a neatly organized tray of Craftsman wrenches. It was 7:45 a.m. The whole glorious weekend stretched out before me. A perfect, quiet expanse of time to do the thing I loved most. Then my phone buzzed, the vibration rattling against the metal workbench with an intrusive sound. I glanced at the screen. It lit up with 2 words that instantly soured the air. "Oh, I'm calling." A familiar low-grade anxiety tightened its cold fist in my gut. My mother and I didn't have the kind of relationship where we just called to chat. Her calls were always instruments with a purpose. Announcements, requests, or more often than not, corrections on some perceived failing of mine. I wiped a spot of grease from my thumb with a red shop rag and answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Hey, Mom. Jennifer, honey." Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone that always set my teeth on edge. It was her, "I'm about to ask for something and I need you to feel guilty if you say no" voice. "Are you busy right now? Your father and I need to see you. It's important." "I'm in the garage working on the bike," I said, looking at the Harley. "Is everything okay? Is someone sick?" "Oh no, everyone's fine, fine," she said a little too quickly. We need to talk. It's a family matter. It's about the house." "The house?" My mind raced. Did they need to borrow money? Did they think I should sell it? I figured they just wanted a proper tour now that I was settled, or maybe to see the progress on the Harley. "Yeah, sure, I can be there in an hour or so." "Wonderful, dear." She hung up before I could ask any more questions. The line went dead. I put the phone down, the peaceful quiet of my garage suddenly feeling thin, brittle. The air felt charged, like right before a lightning strike. I took a last look at the bike, my beautiful, complicated monument to my own hard work and independence. A strange protective feeling washed over me, a primal urge to guard what was mine. I didn't know why I felt it so strongly, but I did. I meticulously locked up the garage, double-checking the handle. I got in my truck and drove toward my parents' house, a place I'd left at 19 and never really looked back on with any warmth. I was heading into a meeting, but my gut told me it was an ambush, and I had no idea that this quiet Saturday morning was the last truly peaceful moment I would have for a very, very long time. The moment I stepped across the threshold of my parents' house, I knew my gut had been right. This was an ambush. The air inside was thick and heavy, stagnant with unspoken intentions. It smelled faintly of old potpourri and lemon pledge, a scent that always reminded me of being on my best behavior. A grandfather clock ticked loudly in the hallway, counting down the seconds to a confrontation I hadn't prepared for. They were all there, arranged in the living room like a tribunal, waiting for the accused. My father, Roberto, was in his big leather armchair, the one he not so jokingly called the throne. He had the posture of a king holding court. My mother, Maria, was perched on the very edge of the floral sofa, her hands knotted together in her lap, a study in practiced anxiety. My younger brother, Alex, was slouched next to her, looking profoundly bored and entitled, scrolling through his phone as if my arrival was an inconvenience. And to my complete surprise, my cousin Elena was there. She was a marketing director downtown, always dressed to the nines. Today was no exception. She sat primly on a side chair, a designer purse that cost more than my first car payment resting at her feet. A silent, well-dressed reinforcement. No one said hello. There were no pleasantries, no offer of a drink. My father gestured with his chin toward the empty wingback chair opposite him. "Jennifer, sit down." I remained standing. My body instinctively knew this was a position of weakness. I crossed my arms. "Mom said you wanted to talk about the house." Roberto leaned forward, the leather of his chair groaning in protest. He steepled his hands under his chin, a gesture he used when he was about to lay down the law. He had this way of looking at you, his eyes scanning your face as if he were calculating your worth and finding it lacking. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice low and deliberate, each word chosen for maximum weight. "Your mother and I and Alex, we've all been talking, and we've come to a decision about what's best for this family." I waited. The ticking of the clock in the hall seemed to get louder. Alex finally put his phone away, a sign that the main performance was about to begin. "We believe it would be fairer," my father finally said, his eyes locking onto mine, "if Alex had your house." The words just hung there in the air, so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that for a second I was sure I'd misheard. It was like he just told me the sky was green. But the look on his face, stern, resolute, without a hint of irony, told me I hadn't. I glanced at my mother, looking for some sign that this was a joke. She quickly jumped in, her voice taking on that wounded, manipulative tone she had perfected over decades. "Honey, you have to understand our position," she cooed, leaning forward earnestly. "Alex is struggling. You know that. His photography, it's a difficult field to break into. He's a true artist, but he needs a stable place to work, a studio to create. That big garage of yours, it would be perfect for him. It would give him the start he needs." "And you're doing so well, Jennifer," my father added, framing my success not as something to be proud of, but as a resource he had the right to allocate. "You have a good, stable job as an engineer, a great salary. You're practical. You can find another place. For Alex, this is a make-or-break opportunity to follow his dream." My brother Alex, the 29-year-old artistic genius who had never held a real job for more than 6 months, just nodded along solemnly, a flicker of a smug smirk playing on his lips. He didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. He was looking at a spot on the wall behind me, as if he were already visualizing where he'd hang his first masterpiece. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a request. It was a verdict they had reached in my absence. They had sat in this very room, deliberated on the fate of my property, my 8 years of sacrifice, my future, and decided it belonged to someone else. A cold, hard anger began to rise from the pit of my stomach. It was so familiar. It was the taste of my entire childhood in this house, the feeling of being the reliable, sensible, secondary daughter, the feeling of my efforts and accomplishments being treated as nothing more than a resource pool for my brother's endless, expensive whims. My father must have seen the shift in my expression, the hardening in my eyes. He hardened his own tone to match. "We sacrificed a lot for you, Jennifer. Don't forget that. We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you. We raised you. It's time you repaid the family." "We gave you everything we could," my mother chimed in, her eyes welling up with perfectly timed tears. "We loved you. We supported you. Now we're just asking you to do the same for your brother. Is that really so much to ask?" I looked at their faces, a united front of delusion and emotional blackmail. They had completely rewritten history to suit their narrative. The roof over my head? I'd started paying them rent at 19 as soon as I had a full-time job. The food? I'd mostly bought it myself with money from my job at my Uncle James's auto shop. The sacrifices they mentioned were a fantasy. Their real sacrifice, their total financial and emotional investment, had always been a laser beam pointed directly at Alex. I remained silent for a long moment. The gears in my engineer's brain were trying to process the flawed logic, the emotional fallacies, the fundamental design flaw in their thinking. My silence was my mistake. They took it as weakness, as a sign I was considering it. My mother's face twisted into a mask of disappointment. "You're being selfish, Jennifer. I raised you to be better than that." "You have a moral obligation to this family," my father declared, his voice rising, gaining the momentum of self-righteousness, "an obligation to support your brother when he's in need. That is the bedrock of what a family is." That was the line, the one that broke through my shock, the one that made everything crystal clear. That's when I found my voice. It wasn't loud, it wasn't shaking with anger, it was cold, colder than the steel of my workbench in winter. I looked directly at my father, then at my mother, then I let my gaze rest on my brother for a fraction of a second. "No," the word hung in the air. A small, hard, indestructible object. My father's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "What did you just say to me?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice absolutely steady. "That is not going to happen. The house is mine. I bought it with my money. The conversation is over." I turned my back on them. I didn't storm out. I walked deliberately toward the front door. I had given them my answer. There was nothing else to discuss. This wasn't a negotiation. As my hand touched the cold brass of the doorknob, my father's voice boomed from behind me. The calm, authoritative tone was gone, replaced by the raw, naked fury of a king whose decree had been defied. "You'll regret this, Jennifer. Don't you dare walk away from your family. This isn't over. Do you hear me?" I didn't turn around. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I just opened the door and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, which suddenly felt harsh and accusatory. I got into my truck, the familiar cab, feeling like a lifeboat. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were bone white. The windows were up, but I could still feel the toxic energy from that house pressing in on me, trying to suffocate me. My father's threat, "You'll regret this," echoed in my head. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that tone from him. It was the sound of his profound disappointment, the sound of me failing yet again to live up to some unwritten family script where I was supposed to be the beautiful, responsible, supporting character in the grand drama of Alex's life. As I finally pulled away from the curb, the stress of the confrontation and the weight of that threat triggered a memory. It wasn't a fuzzy recollection. It was sharp and vivid, a high-def replay in my mind. It was from my senior year of high school. I was 17. I had just gotten the mail, and in it was a thick envelope from the state university. My heart was pounding as I tore it open. I'd been accepted into the mechanical engineering program. It wasn't a fancy, expensive private college like the Portland Arts Institute where Alex would eventually go. But for me, it was Harvard. It was MIT. It was my ticket out. It was the finish line of years of working greasy, tiring jobs, of studying late into the night, of saving every single dollar, of keeping my grades up when all I wanted to do was sleep. I remember running into the living room, the official letter clutched in my hand, my heart pounding with a rare, uncomplicated joy. My father was on the couch reading the newspaper. My younger brother, Alex, was sprawled on the floor, messing with some new expensive camera he'd gotten for his birthday. "Dad, I got in," I said, my voice cracking with excitement. I held out the letter like a trophy. I got into the engineering program, early admission. My father lowered his newspaper, a look of mild annoyance on his face at being interrupted. He took the letter, his eyes scanning the first paragraph for no more than 3 seconds. He handed it back to me. "That's good, Jennifer," he said, his voice completely flat, his eyes already drifting back to the sports page. "Keep up the good work." That was it. My life-changing news, the culmination of all my hard work, was dismissed with the same level of enthusiasm one might have for a passing weather report. Keep up the good work. A moment later, Alex called out from the floor, his voice lazy. "Hey, Dad, check this out." He held up his camera, showing off a slightly blurry picture he'd just taken of a dust bunny under the sofa. My father put the newspaper down instantly. He leaned over, a broad, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Now that's fantastic, Alex. Look at that composition. The use of shadow. You've got a real eye for it, son. A real natural gift." He spent the next 10 minutes discussing the artistic merits of a photograph of a clump of dust and hair. He talked about Alex's potential, his future, how they needed to nurture his talent. I just stood there in the middle of the room, invisible. The thick, important acceptance letter in my hand suddenly felt like a piece of worthless, flimsy paper. It wasn't just about the lack of praise. I was used to that. It was the stark, brutal contrast. It was the undeniable, in-your-face evidence of where the family's emotional and financial investment was always directed. My concrete achievements were minor milestones to be noted and forgotten. Alex's lazy hobbies were signs of burgeoning genius to be celebrated and funded. That memory wasn't just a memory. It was the Rosetta Stone for my entire life. It explained everything. And driving away from that house nearly 15 years later, I realized with a sickening certainty that absolutely nothing had changed. They still saw me, my career, my savings, my home, the very embodiment of the good work he told me to keep up, as nothing more than a resource to be plundered for their golden child. I finally pulled into my own driveway, my own house. I walked through the front door and went straight to the garage, my sanctuary. But it felt different now. It felt violated, tainted by their greed. I looked at the beautiful, half-finished Harley, my project of peace, and all I could see was the photography studio they wanted to build in its place. My father's threat wasn't just an angry outburst, it was a promise. And as I stood there in the heavy silence of my garage, a cold dread washed over me, colder than any winter night. This was only the beginning. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare executed with chilling silence. I didn't call them, and they didn't call me. The silence was a weapon, designed to make me anxious, to make me doubt my own decision, to make me crawl back and beg for forgiveness. I tried to lose myself in my work at the auto plant, burying my head in complex transmission schematics. I tried to find peace in the garage at night, turning wrenches and polishing chrome until my knuckles were raw. But there was a constant low-level hum of anxiety under the surface of everything, the feeling of waiting for the other shoe to drop. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a call, an apology, anything. I should have known better. Apologies weren't in their vocabulary, only escalation. The other shoe dropped on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a brutally hot day. I was just getting home from work, my company polo shirt sticking to my back, my feet tired in my steel-toed boots. I was looking forward to a cold drink and an hour of quiet. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a nondescript sedan parked at the curb. A man in a cheap, rumpled suit got out, holding a large manila envelope. He had the bored, world-weary look of someone who delivers bad news for a living. "Jennifer Reynolds?" he asked, his eyes scanning the front of my house as if to confirm it was worth the trouble. "Yeah," I said, my heart starting to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. He walked up my driveway without another word and handed me the envelope. It felt strangely heavy, unnaturally dense, like it was filled with lead. "You've been served." He didn't wait for a reply. He just turned, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving me standing in my own driveway in the oppressive heat, holding a declaration of war from my own family. I walked inside, the air conditioning a cold shock against my skin. I sat down at my simple kitchen table, the same table where I ate my meals alone every night. My hands were trembling slightly as I tore open the seal. The papers inside were thick with legalese, a dense forest of jargon designed to intimidate and confuse. But the message, once I hacked through the verbal undergrowth, was brutally clear. My own parents, Roberto and Maria Reynolds, were suing me. The lawsuit was a staggering work of pure, unadulterated fiction. It claimed that I had a verbal agreement and a long-standing familial understanding to provide for my brother's welfare indefinitely. It accused me of unjust enrichment, claiming that I would never have been able to achieve my current financial position without their foundational, emotional, spiritual, and financial investments. It painted a picture of me as a cold, calculating opportunist who had used their loving support as a ladder and then tried to kick it away. And then came the demands, the section that made my vision swim. They weren't just asking for the house. They were demanding that a judge order me to sign the deed over to Alex, free and clear, as fulfillment of my moral and financial debt. They were demanding that I pay off Alex's outstanding credit card debt, which the document listed with cold precision as $12,458.21. And to top it all off, the final glorious insult. They were suing me for $200 for inflicted emotional distress that my selfish refusal to cooperate had caused them. I read that last part twice, then a third time, certain that my brain was misinterpreting the words. They were suing me for emotional distress. A sound escaped my throat. It was a harsh, choked, humorless laugh. It was the only response my body could produce in the face of such magnificent, breathtaking insanity. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a formal, legal, scorched earth campaign. My own family was now officially my enemy. I dropped the papers on the table as if they were contaminated. I put my head in my hands. The familiar smell of my own home, my coffee, the wood of the table, suddenly felt foreign and hostile. They were actually doing it. The sheer venomous nerve of it all was enough to make me physically sick to my stomach. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I just lay in bed, staring at the shifting shadows on the ceiling, the outrageous claims from the lawsuit swirling and festering in my head. Unjust enrichment, moral debt, emotional distress. The words were poison. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and started scrolling through my phone, a desperate, mindless attempt to numb my brain. And that's when I saw it. The little colored ring around Alex's profile picture. He had posted a new story on Instagram. My thumb hovered over the icon. A voice in my head screamed, "Don't do it, don't look, it's only going to make it worse." But I couldn't help myself, I had to know. I tapped it. The video that filled my screen was shaky, clearly filmed at night from a car. Took me a second to realize what I was looking at. He was parked on the sidewalk across the street from my house, filming my garage, my home. His voice, a smug, theatrical whisper designed to sound profound, came through the speaker. "The future home of Alex Reynolds Photography," he said. A little dramatic pause. "Gotta clear out some of my sister's old junk first, obviously." He zoomed in on my garage door, the light from a street lamp glinting off the paint. "Can't wait to get the new lighting rigs in, the sound system. Gonna be epic. So grateful for my family who always, always fight for what's right and support true artists. Big things coming soon, guys. Stay tuned." I watched it again, then a third time. The cold anger I'd felt before was now white hot, a purifying rage. It wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. It was a public humiliation, a victory lap before the race had even been run. He was so confident, so utterly certain he would win that he was already claiming my space, my sanctuary, as his own. And he called my Harley, my 8-month project of passion and precision engineering, the one thing in the world I was truly proud of building, junk. That was the moment I felt true, absolute loneliness. It was me against all of them. My parents, the architects of this madness, my brother, the gleeful beneficiary, even my cousin Elena, who I now realized wasn't just a passive observer at that meeting. She was an active conspirator. A wave of raw panic washed over me, so intense it made my hands shake. I was an engineer. I solved problems with logic and physics. I didn't know how to fight this. This was a battle of lies, of emotion, of manipulation. I was out of my depth, and I was drowning. The next morning at work, I was a wreck. I stared at the complex schematics on my computer screen, but the lines and numbers just swam before my eyes. I couldn't focus. All I could see were the court documents and Alex's smug, punchable face. During lunch, I was sitting alone in the break room, pushing food around my plate, when my colleague Jessica sat down across from me. Jessica was a senior project manager, a few years older than me, sharp as a tack and with a no-nonsense attitude I'd always respected. She could cut through corporate nonsense like a laser beam. She took one look at my face and said without preamble, "Reynolds, you look like your dog just died and then your truck got repossessed. What's wrong?" I hesitated. I didn't like talking about my personal life at work. Felt unprofessional. But I was drowning, and she had just thrown me a rope. So the floodgates opened. I told her. I told her everything. The demand for the house, the insane lawsuit, the $12,000 credit card debt, the Instagram story. I just laid it all out there. She listened patiently, her fork hovering over her salad, her expression growing more and more serious. When I finally finished, sputtering with impotent rage, she was silent for a full minute. I thought she was going to give me some generic, sympathetic reply like, "Wow, that's terrible." Instead, she said something that changed the entire course of this fight. "This is a project, Jennifer," she said, her voice firm and clear, cutting through my emotional fog. "It has hostile stakeholders, an unrealistic scope, and a fraudulent budget. It's a takeover bid. You're an engineer. Stop thinking like a hurt daughter and start thinking like an engineer. Treat it like a hostile engineering problem. I must have looked completely bewildered because she leaned forward, her eyes intense. What's the first step in any project? Define the scope and gather the data, I mumbled. Exactly, she said with a sharp nod. Your family has presented their version of the data. It's flawed, it's sentimental, and it's based on a foundation of lies. You need to counter it with your own data. Hard data, cold data, financial records, timelines, verifiable communication. You need to build a case that is fact-based and irrefutable. Then she told me something I never knew. Before she got her MBA and became a killer project manager, she had gone to law school for 2 years. She hated it and switched, never taking the bar exam, but she knew how the system worked. I'm not going to be your lawyer, she said, holding up a hand. I'm not qualified, and I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but I can help you get organized. You need to hire a real attorney, a litigator, a shark. But when you walk into their office, you can't just dump a box of receipts and a sad story on their desk. They're busy. You need to hand them a case file, organized chronologically, with a clear data-driven narrative. You make their job easy, and they'll fight harder for you. For the first time in weeks, a sliver of hope cut through my despair. Her advice made sense. It was a language I understood. Logic, data, process, structure. The financial pressure of hiring a lawyer was the next immediate hurdle. The thought of spending thousands of dollars from my hard-earned savings to defend myself against my own family was sickening. And it was in that moment of financial anxiety that another memory surfaced, unbidden. It was my second year of college. I was working 30 hours a week at a grimy gas station on the graveyard shift to pay for my apartment and tuition at the community college I started at. A required physics textbook cost $200. I simply didn't have it. I remember swallowing my pride, the shame burning in my throat, and calling my mom. I explained the situation, how crucial the book was for my upcoming midterm exam. Her reply was swift and without warmth. I'm sorry, Jennifer. We just can't swing that right now. All of our extra funds are being directed toward Alex's career. His private art school tuition is due, and we absolutely can't fall behind on that. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do. $200 for a critical textbook that would determine my grade versus a tuition bill that I knew was in the tens of thousands of dollars. I remember hanging up the phone, not with anger, but with a profound, chilling clarity. I was on my own. I always had been. I ended up buying a used, older edition of the book from a senior and spending hours in the library, cross-referencing it with the correct version. I got a B on the midterm. That memory, triggered by the current financial strain, didn't make me despair. It hardened my resolve into steel. I had survived on my own then, and I would survive on my own now. With Jessica's guidance, I spent the entire weekend at my kitchen table, which I now thought of as my war room. I created a spreadsheet. I listed every job I'd ever had, starting with my uncle's garage at 15. I found old bank statements, my student loan documents, my car payment records. I was building my arsenal, piece by painstaking piece. On Monday, after doing some research, I made an appointment with a young, hungry litigator. Jessica had heard good things about David Chun. I walked into his sleek, modern office not as a victim, but as the project lead for the most important project of my life, the defense of my own existence, and I was carrying the data to back it up. The weeks leading up to the first court hearing were a special kind of hell. It was a war on two fronts. During the day, I was an engineer at Apex Motors, solving complex mechanical problems. My mind focused on tolerances and torque specifications. At night, I was my own forensic accountant, my own paralegal, digging through a decade and a half of my life, trying to quantify my independence in dollars and cents from my lawyer, David. The legal fees started to mount, a constant, draining pressure on the savings I had worked so hard to build. My family, meanwhile, had launched a full-scale emotional assault, a campaign of guilt by 1,000 cuts. My mother would leave long, rambling, tearful voicemails, her voice thick with sorrow, talking about how I was tearing the family apart and breaking her heart. My father would send curt, demanding emails, not with emotion, but with cold, hard pronouncements about honor, duty, and the disrespect I was showing to my elders. It was a coordinated good cop, bad cop routine designed to destabilize me and wear me down. And one night, it almost worked. It was late, probably after midnight, Rain was lashing against the windows. I was in the garage, the single bare bulb overhead casting long, distorted shadows. I was just staring at the Harley. It was still on the lift, half assembled, now covered in a thin layer of dust, a monument to a life I used to have. I hadn't had the heart or the energy to touch it since the lawsuit papers arrived. The garage didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like the main objective in a hostile takeover. I looked at the bike, a symbol of my freedom, and for the first time I felt a crushing, suffocating wave of despair. Was it worth it? All this fighting, all this money, all this pain. My savings were dwindling. My job performance was suffering. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. Maybe I should just give them the house. Just sign it over, sell my tools, sell the bike, pack a bag, and disappear. Start over somewhere in a new state under a new name. The thought was seductive, the idea of just stopping. The exhaustion was so profound, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I leaned heavily against my workbench, the cold metal a shock against my skin, and I seriously, genuinely considered giving up. My lawyer, David, had been firm in our last meeting. "We have a good case, Jennifer, a strong one, based on your financial independence. But right now, it's mostly your word against theirs. They'll get on the stand and cry. They'll talk about what a loving, supportive family they are. Juries and judges can be swayed by that. We need something to shatter that picture, something undeniable. A smoking gun. Shatter the picture." The phrase echoed in my head. What did I have? Bank statements? Pay stubs? They would just argue that their emotional support and stable home environment enabled all of that. It felt hopeless, defeated. I went back inside, dripping with rain and misery. I sat down at my computer, intending to draft an email to David to tell him I was thinking of settling, of surrendering. I was looking for an old financial spreadsheet to calculate what I'd lose. Navigating through the cluttered folders on my old backup hard drive, my finger slipped on the mouse and I accidentally double-clicked on a folder I hadn't opened in almost a decade. The name on the folder was simple, almost laughably mundane: College Finances. My heart started to beat a little faster. A flicker of something, curiosity, hope, cut through the fog of despair. I clicked it open. And there it was. It was all there. Every single email I had ever sent to or received from my parents during my 4 years of college. I had saved them all. A meticulous habit born from my engineering mindset. Document everything. You never know when you'll need to check the original specs. My hands were shaking as I started opening the files. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash of my own young adulthood. There was the polite, almost begging email asking for that $200 for the physics book. And there was my mother's reply, even colder and more dismissive in writing than I remembered. "Jennifer, as we have discussed multiple times, our financial focus must remain on Alex's artistic development. We cannot divert funds at this critical stage. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do." There was another one a year later. I asked if they could possibly help with a $50 fee for a professional engineering certification exam that could help my career. My father himself had replied to that one, a short, brutal email. "Your brother needs a new telephoto lens for his camera that costs over $1,000. We are prioritizing his needs as his career path requires significant initial investment. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." Email after email told the same consistent, damning story. Me, politely, respectfully asking for small, specific amounts for essential educational and career needs. Them, flatly, coldly refusing. Always citing Alex's more important, more expensive needs as the reason. It was a perfect written record of their priorities. It was a 4-year-long ledger of their neglect. It wasn't just my word against theirs anymore. I had their words in writing, with timestamps. The despair I'd felt minutes earlier evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. My hands were steady now. This was it. This was the smoking gun. This was the weapon. This was what would shatter their carefully constructed picture into a million pieces. With this newfound evidence, my entire posture changed. My resolve, which had been crumbling, was now forged into high-carbon steel. But even with this powerful ammunition, I felt a deep-seated need to reach out to one person, one last bastion of sanity I hoped still existed in my family. My grandfather, Luis, my dad's dad. He was a retired mechanic, a man of few words, but deep, unshakable integrity. He and I had always shared a quiet bond over our love for engines and the satisfaction of working with our hands, but I hadn't spoken to him in months. My parents, especially my mother, always acted as the gatekeepers to him, citing his age and his health as reasons he couldn't be bothered. Feeling a desperate need for that solid grounding presence, for one last chance at a family ally, I found his number and called him. The phone rang twice, and then a familiar voice answered, but it wasn't his deep, gravelly tone. It was my mother's, sharp, laced with instant suspicion. "Hello?" My blood ran cold. The odds of her being at his house at this exact moment felt impossibly small. "Mom, what are you doing answering Grandpa's phone?" "Oh, Jennifer," she said, her tone immediately shifting to one of strained, saccharine patience. "Your grandfather isn't feeling well today, dear. He's resting. He asked me to handle his calls so he wouldn't be disturbed." Something about it felt profoundly wrong. The lie was too smooth, too practiced. "Is he okay? Can I just talk to him for a minute? I just want to hear his voice." No, she said a little too quickly, a little too forcefully. "He really needs his rest. I'll tell him you called. He's very tired. And to be honest, Jennifer, this whole situation with the lawsuit has been very upsetting for him. It's best not to bother him with your problems right now." She was stonewalling me, using his health and the very situation she had created as a shield to isolate him. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Just have him call me when he feels up to it," I said, my voice tight with an anger I was struggling to control. "Of course, dear. I'll pass along the message," she said in her most soothing, dishonest voice, and hung up. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my message would never be delivered. They weren't just attacking me. They were actively cutting me off from the only other person in the family I thought I could trust. I didn't know the full extent of their deception yet, but I knew I had to win this fight on my own now. There was no one else. I turned back to my computer. I attached the entire college finances folder to a new email. I sent it to my lawyer, David Chun, with a single, simple subject line. "It's mixing gun." The day of the hearing arrived. A gray, overcast morning that matched my mood. I woke up before my alarm, a knot of ice in the pit of my stomach. This was it. I put on the only suit I owned, a simple, conservative black suit I'd bought off the rack for job interviews years ago. It felt like armor. As I adjusted the tie in the mirror, I looked into my own eyes. They looked older, tired, but there was a flicker of something hard and resolute in them that hadn't been there before. I carried a single slim briefcase. In it were my notes and a copy of the file that David now possessed. I was ready. I walked into the courtroom, the smell of old paper and stale air conditioning filling my lungs. It was a cold, impersonal room, dark wood, faded glory. I sat next to David at the defense table. A few minutes later, my family walked in. It was a calculated, theatrical entrance. My father, my mother, and my brother Alex were all dressed in crisp, matching navy blue polo shirts. It was so bizarre, so unsettlingly coordinated, that it looked like a uniform for some strange, dysfunctional cult. They were presenting themselves as a team, a unified front. The United Reynolds family. My cousin Elena was with them, not in a polo, but in a sharp, expensive-looking power suit, whispering instructions into their lawyer's ear. She looked more like a corporate handler than a loving cousin. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, a tangible chasm between us. They made a great show of not looking at me. My mother was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, a performance of fragile motherhood for the benefit of the judge. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw set in a look of righteous, paternal determination. Their lawyer, a slick, silver-haired man named Mr. Albright, went first. He spoke in a smooth, patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. He painted a masterpiece of pure fiction. He spoke of my parents' unwavering emotional support, their countless financial sacrifices, their simple, humble dream of seeing both their beloved children settled and secure. He waxed poetic about the sanctity of family. He even produced exhibits with a flourish, a large poster board with a collage of photos from my childhood, me on a tricycle, family Christmases, a birthday party. A carefully curated highlight reel of a happy family that had never truly existed. And then, with a completely straight face, he submitted a small, framed McDonald's receipt from 2004 for $8.50 as Exhibit B, proof, he declared to the judge, of their early and consistent investment in their daughter's nutrition and well-being. The absurdity of it was so profound I almost laughed out loud. Then Alex was called to the stand. He strutted up, wearing a look of solemn importance, like a misunderstood genius being asked to discuss his great work. He spoke passionately and at length about his vision for the garage. He didn't call it a garage. He called it a potential creative sanctuary, a future hub for the city's emerging artists. He talked about his artistic struggles, the difficulties of being a visual storyteller in a world that didn't appreciate art. He made it sound like a stable home base, my home base, was the only thing standing between him and a Pulitzer Prize. I watched him, and the anger I expected to feel was replaced by a wave of profound pity. He actually believed it all. He had been told his entire life that his wants were essential needs, that his whims were divine inspiration, and that the world, especially his family, owed him a living. He was the end product of their lifelong project, and he was a hollow man. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of lies, it was our turn. David stood up. His youthful, energetic presence was a stark contrast to the stuffy theatrical performance of Mr. Albright. "The defense calls Jennifer Reynolds to the stand," he said, his voice clear and confident. A small murmur went through the gallery. I walked up to the witness stand, the wood cool beneath my hand, and was sworn in. I sat down, my hands resting on my knees to keep them from shaking, and I looked directly at the judge. She was a woman in her 60s, Judge Sarah Wilkins, sharp, intelligent eyes behind her glasses that seemed to miss nothing. She had a reputation for being tough but fair. David approached. He didn't start with the lawsuit, he started with me. "Ms. Reynolds," he began, his voice calm and direct, "could you please tell the court about your first full-time job?" I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. I was 17 years old. I worked as a shop hand at my uncle's auto repair garage in the next town over. I swept floors, I changed oil, I learned the basics of mechanics. And after that, I worked the night shift at a warehouse through my last year of high school to save for a car. I worked weekends at a gas station during my first 2 years of community college. When I transferred to the State University for my engineering degree, I had a full-time job as a line technician at a manufacturing plant. I worked from 4 p.m. to midnight, and I had classes in the morning. David let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of that schedule sink in. "And during all this time, Ms. Reynolds, from the age of 17 onward, did you pay for your own expenses? Your rent, your car, your food, your books?" "Yes," I said, "I did." "Did you take out student loans to pay for your college tuition?" "Yes, a little over $50,000 worth in total." "And have you been the one making the payments on those loans since you graduated?" "Yes, every single month for the last 9 years." He walked a little closer to me, his voice softening slightly. "Ms. Reynolds, in your own words, could you describe for the court the primary source of your success in life, the source of the funds you used to purchase your home?" I looked past him for just a second at my parents. My mother was no longer crying. She was watching me with a look of cold, reptilian fury. My father was shaking his head slightly, a dismissive sneer on his lips, as if my words were an annoying fiction. I turned back to the judge and I spoke directly to her. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and clear. All the nervousness was gone, replaced by a simple, hard truth. My success, what little I have, comes from my own work. It comes from my own hands. It comes from my own discipline. It comes from 16 years of getting up early, staying late, studying for exams after a full shift, and never, ever expecting anyone to hand me anything. I built my life myself. It was the truest, most complete thing I had ever said in my life. The story I had never been allowed to tell in my own family, the one they had tried so hard to erase, was now on the official court record, under oath. David let my words settle in the quiet courtroom. He let the simple, unadorned truth of my life hang in the air. Then he turned to the judge, his expression shifting from one of quiet inquiry to that of a prosecutor about to land the final blow. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority that made everyone sit up a little straighter. "What my client just testified to is not a matter of sentimental recollection. It is not a story. It is a matter of documented, verifiable fact." He walked back to our table and picked up a small black flash drive. He held it up between his thumb and forefinger. "The plaintiffs have based their entire case on the premise of their unwavering emotional and financial support for my client, a beautiful story of parental sacrifice. We would now like to present evidence to the contrary. Evidence, I might add, provided by the plaintiffs themselves, in their own words. He handed the flash drive to the court clerk. A moment later, the large screen on the wall of the courtroom, the very same one Mr. Albright had used to show pictures of birthday cakes and my smiling face on a tricycle, flickered to life. It was an email. The interface was old, but the text was perfectly clear. Dated October 12, 2010. From Jennifer Reynolds to Maria Reynolds. Subject: Physics Textbook. The email, my own words from a decade ago, was short and polite. It explained that I needed $200 for a required book for my midterm exam and humbly asked if there was any way they could possibly help, offering to pay it back as soon as I got my next paycheck. Then David had the clerk display the next email in the chain. The reply from Maria Reynolds to Jennifer Reynolds. Subject: Physics Textbook. The judge, Sarah Wilkins, leaned forward slightly in her large chair, her sharp eyes scanning the screen. Then she began to read the email aloud, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, a simple recitation of the facts before her. Jennifer, as we discussed, our financial focus must remain on Alex's artistic development. We cannot divert funds at this critical stage. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do. A collective gasp, small but audible, went through the gallery. I risked a glance at my mother. Her face had gone chalk white. She looked like she'd been slapped, the color draining from her cheeks. Her mouth was slightly open. David didn't stop. He was relentless. Next exhibit, please. An email from me asking for $50 for a certification exam fee, an investment in my future career. And then the reply from my father, read aloud again by the judge's impassive voice. Jennifer, your brother needs a new telephoto lens for his camera that costs over $1,000. We are prioritizing his needs as his career path requires significant initial investment. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. One after another, David displayed the emails, a dozen of them, each one telling the same brutal, consistent story. Each one a small, sharp nail in the coffin of their fraudulent case. There was a request for help with a car repair, so I could get to work. Denied. A request for help with a dental bill. Denied. Always the same reason. Alex's tuition, Alex's supplies, Alex's potential. The courtroom was utterly, profoundly silent, except for the judge's steady voice reading my family's own damning words back to them. When the last email was displayed, she fell silent. She took off her glasses, polished them slowly with a small cloth, and put them back on. It was a deliberate, thoughtful, and terrifying gesture. Then she looked up, her gaze sweeping over my parents, my brother, and my cousin Elena. It was a look of such profound, undisguised contempt that I saw my father physically flinch as if he'd been struck. The mask of the righteous, aggrieved parent had not just been shattered, it had been incinerated, leaving behind only the ugly, grasping truth. Mr. Albright, the slick lawyer, was shuffling his papers, his face flushed, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Alex was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, as if he couldn't comprehend a world where his needs weren't the center of the universe. My mother had her head bowed, her face hidden in her hands, but this time the tears were clearly real. They were tears of pure, unadulterated public humiliation. The judge finally looked at their lawyer. "Do you have anything else to add, counsel?" she asked, her voice dripping with ice. Mr. Albright, for the first time that day, was speechless. He just shook his head, looking down at his table. Judge Wilkins looked at me then, and for a fleeting second, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't just professional judgment. It was a flicker of human understanding, of respect. Then her gaze snapped back to my family. "I think I've seen enough," she said, her voice like the gavel she was about to use. The show was over. We didn't have to wait long for the official verdict. The wheels of justice, for once, turned quickly. For days after the hearing, David Choon called me at work. I took the call in an empty conference room, my heart pounding. "We won, Jennifer," David said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We absolutely won. The judge didn't just dismiss their case, she dismissed it with prejudice, which is a legal term meaning they can never, ever file the same frivolous lawsuit against me again. It's done." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I had to sit down. That's amazing, David, thank you." "Wait, it gets better," he said, clearly enjoying himself. "She wrote in her official ruling that their claim was, and I'm quoting directly here, a transparent and malicious attempt to expropriate property through the abuse of familial ties and fabricated emotional debt. She absolutely scorched them. It was over. I had won. I had defended my home, my work, my life. I had stood up to them. And for the first time, I had come out on top. That night, I celebrated, not by going out to a bar or a fancy restaurant, but by going into my garage. I took the dusty cover off the Harley. I put on some old Tom Petty, and for the first time in months, I worked on my bike. I felt the familiar, easy peace return, but it was deeper now, more solid. It was the peace of a woman who had fought a dragon, and against all odds, had won. That peace lasted for exactly 2 days. I came home from work on Friday evening, looking forward to a weekend of freedom, and found it. My beautiful, clean white garage door had been spray painted. In huge, sloppy, dripping red letters were 2 words. I'm a thief. Liar. My heart hammered against my ribs, a panic drumbeat. I ran to the door, my hands fumbling with the keys, a terrible, sickening dread rising in my throat. I swung it open, praying they had just stopped at the door. They hadn't. They had gotten to the Harley. They had taken a can of the same red paint and poured it all over the engine I had so meticulously rebuilt. It dripped from the cooling fins onto the floor, a pool of blood-red violation. The custom leather seat I'd saved for months to buy was slashed to ribbons, the stuffing pulled out like guts. A rage, pure and absolute, unlike anything I had ever felt in my life, surged through me. It wasn't hot and loud, it was ice cold and silent. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This wasn't about money or a house. This was a crime. This was a violation of the deepest, most personal kind. They had come into my space and tried to destroy the one thing that was purely mine. I didn't yell. I didn't punch a wall. My engineer's brain took over, pushing through the rage. Document. Observe. Shame. I pulled out my phone and documented everything, taking sharp, clear pictures from every angle. Then a spark of memory. My security camera. The one I'd installed over the garage door a year ago after a few packages went missing. I went inside, my hands shaking with adrenaline, and pulled up the footage from the night before on my laptop. And there they were. At 1:37 a.m., the infrared camera casting them in a ghostly white light. The footage was grainy, but the identities were unmistakable. It was Alex, holding the can of spray paint, his movements jerky and filled with a spiteful energy. And right behind him, holding a flashlight and a utility knife, was my cousin Elena, the respectable marketing director. I watched in stunned silence as Alex vandalized my property while Elena, the corporate professional, acted as his lookout and accomplice before stepping forward herself and taking the knife to my motorcycle seat with vicious, deliberate slashes. I saved the video file to my desktop. I picked up my phone and called the police. An hour later, a police cruiser, its lights off, pulled silently into my driveway. A weary-looking officer in his 40s named Rodriguez got out. He had the tired, seen-it-all eyes of a man who spends his nights dealing with the worst parts of human nature. Initially, his attitude was exactly what I expected. Professional, but skeptical. "So, you're saying your brother did this?" he asked, looking at the graffiti on the garage door, his tone non-committal. "I'm not saying it," I replied, my voice calm and even, a strange byproduct of my focused rage. "I'm showing you." I led him inside to my kitchen table, my war room. I didn't just show him the security footage. I showed him everything. I had it all laid out. First, I gave him a printed copy of the judge's ruling from the lawsuit, with the key phrases highlighted. Then, I played him the security video on my laptop. I explained the context, not with emotion, but with a simple logical timeline. They sued me for the house. They lost in court on Tuesday. This happened Thursday night. This is not a random act. This is retaliation. As he watched the video of Alex and Elena, Officer Rodriguez's entire demeanor changed. The professional weariness vanished, replaced by a hard, serious focus. He leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. He saw what I saw. Not a messy family squabble, but a premeditated criminal act. Conspiracy, destruction of property, felony. "I'll need a copy of this video file," he said, his voice now firm, all business, "and a copy of that court order that establishes motive. We'll be paying your brother and cousin a visit." For the second time in a week, the system I had been so afraid of was working for me. All because I had cold, hard documentation. The fallout was swift and spectacular. The police visit clearly terrified my family because their tactics immediately shifted from physical destruction to public smearing. Alex launched a GoFundMe page titled, "Help Me Rebuild After Family Betrayal." It was filled with lies about how I had stolen his inheritance and manipulated the courts. My mother took to a local community Facebook group, writing a long, tear-soaked post about her ungrateful, cold-hearted daughter who was using the police to tear her own family apart over money. But they had fundamentally miscalculated. They assumed everyone in their world saw things their way. My phone buzzed with a notification from a family group chat I had muted weeks ago. My cousin Diego, Elena's younger brother, had posted the link to my mother's Facebook screed. His message read, "Aunt Maria, Uncle Roberto, what is wrong with you people? I just saw the security footage Jennifer sent me. You sued her, you lost, and then you send Alex and Elena over like a couple of thugs to destroy her property. Are you insane? Leave her alone." The chat exploded. Other aunts, uncles, and cousins jumped in. Some defended my parents with weak platitudes about family loyalty, but many, to my absolute shock, defended me. They spoke of how they'd always seen the blatant favoritism, how they'd watched me work my tail off while Alex was handed everything on a silver platter. The final decisive blow, however, came from the one person I had tried and failed to reach. A message appeared in the chat from a number I didn't have saved, but a name I knew better than my own. Ed Luis Reynolds, my grandfather. His message was short, brutal, public. "Roberto and Maria, you are a disgrace to this family's name. She succeeded in spite of you, not because of you. Leave your daughter alone before you embarrass yourselves further." A profound sense of vindication washed over me, so strong it felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. The truth was out. The family wasn't a unified front. It was a fractured group of people who had been silent for far too long. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up the last of the mess in the garage, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my grandfather, Luis, standing on my porch. He looked older than I remembered, his face etched with worry, but his eyes were clear and steady. "Your mother told me you didn't want to talk," he said, his voice gravelly with emotion. "She told me you were angry at me, but I know my son, and I know you, so I knew she was lying." He had driven 2 hours to see me the moment he saw the explosion in the group chat. The real cavalry had just arrived. My grandfather's arrival was a turning point. It was like the first clean rain after a forest fire. He didn't just stay for an hour. He put his small overnight bag down in my spare room and stayed for the whole weekend. He didn't talk much about the lawsuit or the family drama at first. Instead, he walked into my garage, surveyed the damage with a critical eye, looked at the paint-splattered Harley, and said, his voice full of gravelly purpose, "Well, looks like we've got work to do. Where are the rags and the turpentine?" For 2 solid days, we worked side by side in that garage. We painstakingly cleaned every single part of that engine. He was slow and methodical, his old, gnarled hands still possessing a mechanic's gentle, certain touch. He showed me a trick for getting paint off chrome without scratching it, a technique involving mineral spirits and a specific type of soft cloth, a secret he'd learned 50 years ago in his own shop. We talked for hours, but not about them. We talked about engines, about the superiority of old American steel, about the right way to gap a spark plug. His quiet, focused presence was a healing balm. It was the most normal, most peaceful time I'd had in months. His presence was a silent yet solid validation that I wasn't the crazy one. I wasn't the problem. In the weeks that followed, inspired by his visit, I started to deliberately build a new life, a real one. Not just a life of quiet survival. On his advice, I finally walked across the street and introduced myself properly to my neighbors, Michael and Susan Peterson, a retired couple who had lived in that house for 30 years. Michael was a former plumber with a workshop of his own, and Susan had been a high school English teacher. She had this unnerving ability to see right through people and understand complex family dynamics. She quickly became an informal mentor, a wise, warm presence I could talk to without judgment. I took another big step, one I'd been thinking about for years. I went to the local animal shelter. I wasn't looking for a cute, energetic puppy. I was looking for a companion who, like me, had a few scars and understood the value of a quiet, stable home. That's where I found Diesel. He was a 7-year-old German shepherd with a slight, permanent limp in his back leg and the calmest, wisest eyes I'd ever seen. The tag on his cage said he'd been abandoned by his previous family when they moved. We understood each other immediately. I filled out the adoption papers that day. I also, at Susan's urging, looked up a local vintage motorcycle club. I was hesitant at first. I've never been much of a joiner, but I rolled my half-restored Harley into a Saturday morning meeting in the back of an old diner. I was met not with judgment or criticism, but with genuine, enthusiastic interest and immediate offers of help. These were my people. They spoke my language, the language of carburetors and custom parts. They valued the work of a person's hands above all else. My world was slowly, carefully expanding. It was filling up with new relationships, ones based not on a toxic sense of obligation or unwritten debts, but on shared interests, mutual respect, and genuine kindness. My family was now a 78-year-old retired mechanic, a sharp-witted retired schoolteacher, a quiet, loyal rescue dog, and a bunch of gearheads who loved old bikes as much as I did. And it was more real, more solid, and more supportive than anything I had ever known in my 31 years. One Sunday afternoon, about a month after his first impromptu visit, my grandfather and I were sitting on my front porch in two old rocking chairs, watching Diesel sleep in a patch of sun. We had just finished a long but satisfying day of work on the bike. The engine was finally clean and reassembled. Luis turned to me, his expression more serious than I'd seen it. He had something on his mind. "I need to tell you something, Jennifer, something I should have told you a long, long time ago." He told me about my college graduation, the day I had thought he'd been too sick to attend. "I was there," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the street. "I wanted to come. I wanted to see you get that diploma, to celebrate with you. I called your father the week before to make travel plans. He told me not to come." I stared at him, my heart clenching. "Why? What did he say?" "He told me you were embarrassed by me," Louise said, the words tasting like poison even now. "Said you were moving up in the world, and that you didn't want your hick mechanic grandfather with grease under his fingernails around your new, educated college friends. He said you had asked them specifically not to invite me, to spare yourself the awkwardness." The lie was so incredibly cruel, so perfectly designed to wound both of us, that it stole the breath from my lungs. That's not true. That is the biggest lie I've ever heard. I wanted you there more than anyone. I asked them if you were coming, and they said you were too sick to travel, that the long drive would be too much for you. A sad, knowing look crossed my grandfather's face. "I know it's not true, mija. I know that now. But I believed it for a while. It hurt. But still, I couldn't stay away. I drove up anyway. I parked my old truck across the street from the stadium, and I watched the whole ceremony through a pair of binoculars I keep in the glove box. I saw you walk across that stage, Jennifer, and I was never more proud in my entire life." He reached into the worn leather wallet he carried in his back pocket and carefully took out a faded, slightly blurry photograph. He handed it to me. It was me, a tiny, indistinct figure in a cap and gown, walking across a stage hundreds of yards away. He had taken it from his truck. He had kept it in his wallet for almost 10 years. Tears, hot and sudden, welled in my eyes and spilled down my cheeks. The paternal validation I had craved my entire life, the pride I had ached for, was right here in this blurry, long-distance photograph. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been stolen from me. I hugged my grandfather tightly. For the first time in a very long time, I let myself cry into someone's shoulder, without shame, without restraint. That night, after he had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch with Diesel curled at my feet, and I stared up at the stars. I thought about all the lies that had tried to define my life, all the small betrayals, all the subtle wounds. And then I thought about every single choice I had made to stand up, for myself, for my work, for my peace. I wasn't a disappointment. I wasn't ungrateful. I wasn't cold or unloving. I had simply refused to be a pawn in someone else's fantasy. That summer, my business finally took off. Word had spread through the vintage bike community about my garage. People brought me Harleys and Triumphs and Indians, machines that needed a careful, respectful hand. I hired 2 part-time apprentices, women in their 20s, who reminded me of myself at that age. Gritty, curious, full of potential. I paid them fairly. I taught them what Mr. J had taught me, and then some. One of them, Kayla, even cried on her second week after she got her first paycheck. She said, "No one in my family ever thought I could do anything with my hands. They just assumed I'd mess everything up." I smiled and handed her a wrench. Then you're going to prove them wrong, one bolt at a time. I didn't cut off my parents entirely. I didn't have to. They tried to send me an email a few weeks after the vandalism incident, something about clearing the air. I forwarded it directly to my lawyer. Elena lost her job when someone anonymously, not me, of course, sent her employer the police report. Her position required a high standard of personal integrity, and apparently felony vandalism doesn't qualify. Alex's GoFundMe campaign was quietly shut down after multiple reports of fraud and misuse of funds. My parents, they still live in the same house, the same patterns, the same lies. But I'm not there. I am here. In a house I earned, with hands that built something real, with people who chose me, freely and fully. People like my grandfather, who still visits every Sunday. People like Susan, who brings over lemon bars and unsolicited wisdom. Like Diesel, who follows me from room to room like a shadow with fur. I no longer define family by blood. Family, to me, is who shows up when the smoke clears. It's who sits beside you and helps you scrub red paint from your engine block. Who believes you when the world tries to tell you you're selfish or cold or wrong for choosing yourself. And sometimes, when you're very lucky, it's a tired old man with a wrench, a wallet photo, and a stubborn belief that you deserved better all along. So yeah, that's how it happened. My name is Jennifer Reynolds. I'm 31. I build motorcycles. And when my family came for my house, my work, and my peace, I didn't just survive it. I built something better. I built